I'm here to introduce Tim Blake Nelson and Sam Waterston. So, Tim, you not only are in this film, you wrote and directed this film as well, very well. What was your original inspiration for telling this story?
I just wanted to be able to hang out with Sam. How about Sam? I mean, well, I think the film talks pretty clearly about its concerns, and these have been concerns of mine for years as I've watched us become more technologically adept. I like to think of it as it's as if we're becoming God. The Old Testament notion of God. We can communicate across the planet instantaneously. We can rocket ourselves into space, create devices that destroy cities in minutes, and particularly with technology. Such a distraction, are the age-old questions still worth asking? And I've always felt that it's perhaps now more necessary. I also wanted to write a film about New York. I didn't grow up here. I grew up in Oklahoma, and I felt that I needed to live here for a while, really, to understand it, and as it were, to have the right to make a film about the city. And after 30 years, which is now the majority of my life, I felt, okay, I'm ready. And so thus was born Anesthesia.
And Sam, what interested you in becoming a part of this project?
My manager, Keith Addis, read it before I did, and he recommended it to me, and then I read it, and I felt an identity immediately with the character and his nature, and then I got to the end, and there was a quote from Montaigne, and my father turned me on to Montaigne in a very Montaigne way, years and years ago. And this year, at long last, after carrying around the essays of Montaigne with me and reading them a little bit at a time, finally this year, I completed reading the book, and I've started all over again. And I literally thought, when I read those lines, they wrote this for me. He must have known. And of course, he didn't know. I wasn't even on his radar. But then Keith kind of put me in your mind, and then you decided to let me do it.
Yeah, Sam and I met at the Fairway Cafe up on 74th Street. Which, interestingly enough, is where I originally set our scene as father and son. It's just that we couldn't shut it down. And so I imagine there's a superfluity of actors in the audience, and you guys know that you need quiet to shoot a scene because you got to shoot it from all those different angles and make the sound work. And so we had to switch that out. But originally, that's where we were going to meet in the movie as father and son, and it's where we met as director and actor.
I'll tell you what's funny is I still think that's where we shot the scene. I have no memory of where we actually shot it.
We shot it at a restaurant called Domain up right near the Columbia campus.
Means absolutely nothing to me.
Well, Sam alone is certainly worth the price of admission, but you have quite a cast that you've assembled here. How did you line up such an amazing roster for what I would imagine was probably not a hugely budgeted film?
Again, as many in this room know, there are fewer and fewer films being made, and certainly fewer dramas being made. And actors want to do interesting roles, and so I try to write really good scripts, and then I hang on to them for a while, and revise and revise and revise to the point where I just know it's going to be really difficult for an actor to turn me down. And so for the most part, the film is just chock-a-block with first choices. And also I wanted a New York cast. I really wanted a local cast so that the milieu of the movie is New York, and the characters inhabit that milieu. And I wanted actors who just got it and lived it on a daily basis, who rode the subway. And these are a lot of them friends of mine. Jessica Hecht I called personally. Much of the cast I called personally. But I also have this great ally in A.V. Kaufman who casts with me. My role I wasn't originally going to play. I tried my pal Michael Stuhlbarg, I thought would have been great in that role, but he was unavailable, so I thought, all right, I'll play it.
Can I add that, I think you know this too, that a movie that knows that it's talking about something and knows what it's talking about. In other words, the person who has the pretension to talk about something important has actually done the homework is such a rarity that it's a very powerful magnet, right? Everybody would go out of their way to do that kind of work, and that's what Tim does. He said he'd been thinking about this for a long time, about his New York experience and everything. But the other thing is that he's been thinking about the questions that he talks about in this movie for a long, long time, and so he knows what he thinks.
Sam, you're.
Are you pointing at me?
Yeah, no, I like that's. I think that's great. Thank you.
Sam, you're known for many things, but perhaps most of all for Law and Order, your long run on a great show. I'm wondering if in any way, maybe even subconsciously, this story appealed to you because it starts with a crime in New York City and then kind of unfolds.
That's the first time I have ever thought that thought, but it's a great thought.
And your relationship with Glenn Close is so wonderful in the film. Are you guys friends? Have you worked together before? Do you know each other, or was that just great acting?
We did a play together a long, long time ago, and she's one of these people that has a real talent for friendship. And it was very, very gracious of her to be in this movie, and she brought. She really has her legs under her. She's a completely authentic performer, and it added immeasurably to the relationship. I thought.
Yeah.
It made it real and authentic, and just. Not with big arrows pointing at it, and did you notice how authentic this is? But it's just there.
Yeah, absolutely. And Kristen Stewart, I think, is really remarkable in the film as well, and she's been doing some really interesting roles, particularly in the last couple of years. how did you think of her for that role and get her to become involved?
Well, I knew Kristen a little bit. We'd met about another script that she had wanted to do of mine, and I had to put that on hold for a bit because the financing fell through, and then I wrote this, and I thought, well, this is a great role for Kristen, and so I texted her, and called her agent as well, and within, I don't know, 4 days, she had said yes. And she wrote this really funny, long text in Christianese that just described who and what the character was beautifully. Just a few words about Kristen. She's the real deal. This is a blue collar actress, and she so divides the public because she has certainly her fans, but then those who just think that the Twilight series is who and what she is and abominate that and therefore abominate her because of her association with it. They've just got it all wrong. Her family, she comes from a crew background. She puts on no airs. She's unashamedly who and what she is. And she works her tail off. She's an incredibly responsive performer in terms of direction, but without ever losing her own sense of who and what she is. So there's always dignity there. And she gives off no attitude. There's no obsession with perks, none of that. She's just the real thing. I'm telling you, she will become a Jodie Foster one day. Jodie is a really good example. I'll just leave it at that. And then the rest of the cast. I mean, Sam centers it, and then you've got some of the great stage actors in New York. Todd Freeman.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about him. He's incredible in the movie.
Isn't he wonderful?
Yeah, he plays Joe.
And I didn't know Ken. I'd seen him on stage, but Avi said, "Look, I think I've told Ken this, but I thought, okay, Chris Rock is going to play this role, and because I think he's a remarkable actor. I loved him in, I think it was New Jack City. Yeah. And I think he's a wonderful actor and a really smart guy, and I hubristically thought, he'll read it, and of course he's going to want to play it. But I, didn't realize that he was editing his own movie at the time, and his producer was Scott Rudin. And so he wasn't even going to read this script. And I waited a month, and there was just, he couldn't even find the time to read it. And so Avi brought Ken in, and I just said, yeah, thank you, Avi. And I loved Ken. I loved meeting him. He's such a great guy. Jessica Hecht, wonderful stage actress. Corey Stahl. These are all local folks.
Yeah. I wonder why you chose the title Anesthesia.
I didn't know what the movie was going to be called until that I got to the point in the writing of it when the mask went on Jessica's character's face, and she's getting anesthetized before the surgery. And in that moment, I thought, well, that's really the commonality among these characters, including Sam's. He's anesthetized by this wonderful life he's created for himself. And I think that anesthesia is such a double-edged word because it's easily a pejorative, but it's also just as easily something that we need and that is healthy. And so I liked that double-sided nature of it, you know, the inverse and converse of it in terms of its meaning. And I think that it hopefully operates very actively in terms of each character in the movie finding some sort of anesthesia. You know, Kristen's cri de coeur about the technology and our devices and how we turn to them for all the answers. I think, you're the one who says God in our hands. Is that what you said the other day about your device? Let's ask.
Oh, yeah.
You know, that's its own form of anesthesia, you know, when we restlessly go to it, because that distraction is, you know, often takes us away from pain or anxiety.
Sam, what was the most challenging part of the film for you? Was it the long speeches that you had to memorize, or was it the physical scenes of being attacked? And what did you find the most difficult to do in this role?
That's a really curious question, because I mean, I guess there were the biggest physical challenge was the wind blowing down Riverside Drive in the middle of the night and trying to keep your lips moving. But when you were asking the question, I thought challenging really. This is going to sound like the Mutual Admiration Society, but Tim has an enormous clarity about the way he speaks, as you've just been hearing, and which is a reflection of the clarity with which he thinks. And this was his movie, so he'd thought about it thoroughly, and you felt that you were in a very comfortable and safe place, kind of leaving it up to him. And so if there were challenges, they were on him.
That's kind of you.
What was the most difficult sequence for you to shoot, Tim?
Yeah. Probably the lecture, and it would really have been difficult if Sam hadn't been so great. So it had nothing to do with Sam. It was because it was probably my most self-critical moment in the shooting, and I'll tell you why. And I'm just realizing this now, or maybe I'm reminded of having realized it a bit in the editing room. But I'm so careful about in preparation. I like to think of myself as a director who gets all of the decisions that can be made before production decided before production, so that no time is wasted during the shoot day whatsoever, and therefore all time is lavished on what only occurs during the shoot day, which is capturing those scintillating, ineffable, unpredictable moments between scene partners in their interactions with one another. And that's why you go see a movie like this. To encounter a character like Sam's, being acted by Sam, making my very wordy, articulate dialogue seem like it's just in his mind, and he's spinning these sentences in the moment while you're watching, and you're occupying the space with him. So that's how I want to spend my time on the shoot day. I knew that for the majority of the movie, I wanted it handheld. Not a jittery handheld feel, but a breathing camera feel. So that, again, you had an intimacy with these characters and you felt like you were in the rooms with them, in proximity with them. And so the movie is shot mostly handheld, and with neither compressed lenses, so no telephoto lenses, and no wide lenses either. It's all just pretty much 35 and 50 millimeter lens, which sees the characters, sees the scenes and characters as the eye sees, no distortion. But I knew that once the lecture started, that occupies the golden section of the movie, if this were a piece of music, where Sam lectures and the stories come together, that I wanted that to be all on Steadicam. And that there would be no Steadicam before that. And no crane shots before that, except for the one at the very beginning, with the shot rising up over the apartment to show you the scene of the mugging, but that would be at the title anyway. So there would be no graceful camera moves. It would be a breathing camera movement, a witnessed feel for the movie. But the lecture, Steadicam. But what I didn't really map out for myself is, okay, it's Steadicam, but what camera movements do you need for specific lines? I realized when we got to the shoot day and when we were in the middle of shooting it, that it was general. My decision had been general. And generality, just like with acting, is your enemy. You want specificity. And so I hadn't figured out, I want to be close in here, I want to be pulling out here, I want to use this line in this particular way and that line in that particular way. And I was figuring it out on the fly and doing al fresco painting when that should have been oil painting. And that was the biggest challenge. And it came from my own negligence. So there you go. Luckily, he had the lines down so cleanly and beautifully. And like no other actor really that I can think of, he took these lectures and honestly, I mean, as you saw, made them feel improvised, which is just, as anybody who acts knows, a remarkable feat. Luckily, I didn't have to worry about that day, too.
You know what you were just saying?
Yeah.
Anybody know the poet Jacques Prévert? Anybody know the poem How to Catch a Bird? You know that poem? Yeah. Yeah, it's a beautiful poem. It's the most wonderful poem about creativity, and it's so much about what Tim was just talking about preparation being everything. And the short story of the poem is the way to catch a bird is to first paint a bird cage, paint it very, very carefully and as attractively as you possibly can with the door open, and paint things inside it to attract the bird, like water and bird seed and a swing to swing on. Then, if you're satisfied with that, take it out into the woods and lean it up against a tree. And then hide behind a bush and wait. And it says beautifully that the amount of time you may have to wait is not a measure of the quality of the painting. And then it says when the bird arrives, if it arrives, then you should paint the door closed. And if the bird sings, it's a good sign, a sign that you can sign the painting. And you know, this meticulous attention to detail is, it's the whole deal, isn't it?
So since this is for the Screen Actors Guild AFTRA Foundation, I wanted to ask you guys, do you remember what role you got your SAG card for?
This Is My Life, Nora Ephron's first movie. Yeah, it was definitely that. I'm pretty sure. Yeah, I believe that was it.
And what was your experience like working on that film with her?
Oh, it was just the beginning of what continues to be a lifetime of school for me, which is what's great about what we do. I will never know even close to sufficiently how to do this, but I just I want to keep learning and getting better at it, and I swear to you, there's not a disingenuous syllable in there. It's the way I feel, and walking on that set, just like working in theater as well, and being around the inventive minds, and what a mind Nora had, but also that was her first movie. I mean, each movie has its own unique story to tell and lesson for you. So here's Nora Ephron, this brilliant journalist, and at that time also a brilliant screenwriter, directing her first film, and she was, I just experienced her being condescended to by department heads, and how she dealt with that. And I remember she said to the DP, who was wonderful, and I think shot the movie really well and served her beautifully. I witnessed a conversation in which she said, "All right, I'm just going to stop you there, because I'm basically, you're saying I'm a first-time director and I don't know what I'm talking about. So tell me what you need, be straight with me, so that we can solve this problem. I don't really care, if I look like an idiot. Just tell me so I can make a decision, and let's just be clear with each other." And it was so disarming to this guy, and he told her what it was that he wanted. I think it was, why a certain shot wouldn't work grammatically with the master, and why she should use, maybe a certain lens wouldn't work. And she said, "All right, well, let's just do it that way." And you see that movie, and like all of Nora's movies, it's directed with a wonderfully sure hand. The other really funny story on that one is that we were in line on the first day at catering, and I think Nora was a foodie, and I think they fired 3 caterers on that movie. But we were in line, and I'm just a terrible neurotic, and then sometimes I can also be an awful teacher's pet. So before I went to work on the film, and again, my first movie, I read every essay she'd ever written and every article she'd ever written. I went and bought her collected works and read them all before I showed up on set. But I didn't leave it at that. I had to let her know that I had done it, which is just terrible of me. And boy, did I get it. Because I said, we're standing there, and I said, "Oh, Nora, I read all your essays before coming up here." And she looked at me like, as only Nora could. And the look in her eyes said, "Well, of course you did. Who wouldn't?" And then she said, "Oh, and what did you think? Tell me about that." And so I said, well, she wants me to be very specific, and so I'm going to mention a really obscure essay or article. And so she'd written this article about the Pillsbury Bake-Off, and I said, "I love that article about the Pillsbury Bake-Off." And then, just as a coup de grace, as a soupçon, I quoted it. And a remark that she'd made. And she just stared at me again with the look of, well, of course you would remember a line from it because I'm that good. And then she said, and what didn't you like about the other essays? Just with this withering look. And I said, Nora, and then I was just speechless and kind of crawled off and
You got what you deserve.
I did. It was terrible. It's a little different than your Stendhal class, right? Yeah. All right, so now your SAG card, now that I've spent 30 minutes answering that.
Do you remember, Sam?
I think it was The Plastic Dome of Norma Jean. A movie, as far as I know, was got one public showing.
Really?
Yeah. One night only in San Francisco.
What was your part?
I honestly don't remember very much. It was a sort of mythological retelling of Marilyn Monroe's childhood or something. It's vague. It's very vague.
Do you know that at a tribute to Sam the other night at the 92nd Street Y, where they also showed Anesthesia, which I was very grateful for, in the reel, they showed Sam from his first career, which was that he was a model.
That was not my first career.
Well, that's what Annette Insdorf said.
No, that's not.
You should see some of these photographs
They took my
with the
picture
Zoolander look.
in fashion. That's embarrassing. Not true.
We only have a few minutes left, but before I get to a couple questions from the audience, I just want to ask you, since we're in front of an audience of actors, what's the best piece of advice you've ever received from another actor, or that you can give to these actors?
I think of two immediately, and I'm sure I'm thinking of them because they're such famous people, but Katharine Hepburn said, your inner clock is ticking. Thank God, because when it's not ticking, it's like death. And Robert Redford said when we were shooting The Great Gatsby, he said, how are they treating you? And I said, great. And he said, you're having a good time? I said, I'm having the time of my life. He said, and everybody's treating you very nicely. And I said, yes. And he said, that's great, but don't for a moment imagine it's about you.
Wow. And Katharine Hepburn was when you did the Glass Menagerie with her? Is that?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
I remember that. Tim, do you have a pearl of wisdom to share?
Yeah, he's heard this because I've told it a few times in some of our interviews recently. But it came from Lois Smith, who's a friend of mine, and it's the best piece of admonition, and that's really what it was, as much as anything. And advice, and loving advice. I just had my first really great stage role. I got to play Thersites in Troilus and Cressida in Shakespeare in the Park. So this is not a very well-known play, but a great fool role. And it was this wonderful director, Mark Wing Davey, who's an idol of mine and continues to be a mentor. And I thought, once I was cast, before we even started rehearsal, I thought, no, I knew everything is going to change for me now. This is, I was young and I was about 3 years out of drama school. And I thought, I'm not going to have to struggle as much anymore. And so went through rehearsals and we did the production, and it was a wonderful, amazing production that was just loathed critically. But it was still a wonderful production. And even in spite of the critical response that it got, because it was a very avant-garde production in Central Park. And so there was, I guess, something a little bit dissonant about the production and the space in which it was mounted, and the audience. But I still thought, well, this, even though it hasn't been received well critically, there are packed audiences every night and sometimes standing ovations, and it's changed. Everything's going to change. And then the play closed, and I was back in my apartment, out of work. The phone was not ringing. I had no scripts to read, nothing. And Lois called and just was checking in, as friends do, and she said, "You really sound down, Tim." And I said, "I just thought it was all going to be different." And she said, "It's not. And you're not just an actor, you're a character actor. And it's never, ever going to be about the one job, ever. Even when you think it is, even when the world is telling you it is, and they say, now you've arrived, now you're on that list, it still won't be. It's about an accumulation of characters. It's not about one role. And as soon as you think it's about one role, you're really no longer an actor. It's about a lifetime of work and what you accumulate in that lifetime. It's the whole. And that has remained absolutely true. And it's true about directing as well. I'm so grateful that I heard it early on.
Very quickly, just want to run through these two questions. For Tim, what was your favorite experience working on Oh Brother, Where Art Thou?
Yeah, the whole thing. Yeah, the most fun I had was at the Stokes rally when Turturro and I are dancing in back of George when he's singing. And John just took me under his wing, and he had a dancing background, and he just said, all right, here's what we're going to do. And he just choreographed. If you watch us, I mean, it's terrible. It's so scenery chewing. It's just, we should have our SAG cards revoked. But I was laughing so hard. It's some of the happiest moments it was one of the happiest days of my life, professional life in any case. So I guess the Stokes rally and dancing.
And Sam, throughout your long and varied career, how have you managed to balance work and family demands so seemingly effortlessly? I know you've got several children who followed in your footsteps as actors. How have you managed to do that?
I was on the crosstown bus in the 70s before we moved out of the city. I was with Lynn, and there was they used to have these ads that they ran, or sort of info ads that the Transit Authority ran as to keep you amused. Sometimes they quoted poems, and sometimes they quoted famous people. And there was a quote that stuck in my mind, and has stuck in my mind ever since, and is the answer to your question, which was Satchel Paige said, "Keep on running and don't look back, because someone may be gaining on you."
And on that note, I'd like to thank Tim Blake Nelson and Sam Waterston.